Hello there and welcome to the Middle East Iron and Steel event. We're delighted to say that we are here in our live lounge. This is right in the middle of the event in Dubai, and that means that we get to grab hold of people as they pass. We get our speakers, we get our exhibitors, all of them eminent speakers, and we get them to join us on our sofas to talk through their experience and their knowledge ultimately. And I'm delighted to say that joining me now is Norman Fong. He is a senior market reporter with Fastmarkets steelmaking raw materials team. Norman actually looks into seaborne pricing for iron ore fines, lumps and pellets, and specifically in the CFR China market, as well as high-grade pellet and pellet feed flows. Now, he was previously a price reporter for Argus Media in Singapore, where he covered bitumen products. Norman, thank you so much for joining me. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you. Okay, let's talk about the iron ore industry as a sector. Is it buoyant at the moment?
Well, I think it really depends on the kind of time frame that you're really assessing it at. In the short term, I think a lot of people would agree with me that it's kind of a doom and gloom kind of industry right now in this year particularly. I think we're not really hearing good news out of major steelmaking blocks in China and Europe. But I think when you look at it from a longer time frame, such as in the midterm, such as 10 to 15 years, it's still a very exciting market whereby there are really many changes to trade flows that we are really keeping track of, especially in exciting regions like the Middle East and North Africa, which is one of the reasons why many people, one of the biggest events in the entire year, they're all congregated here for a specific reason, which is really about green steel and decarbonization. So these are the exciting themes that we are looking forward to, even though the industry right now may not be, buoyant as you may seem.
Certainly this event has slightly blown me away. It's about 10 times the size that many people expected it to be. It's really prestigious. All the top names are here. And I suppose you've mentioned a couple of the sort of top themes that people are discussing here. Maybe we could flesh those out a bit. What are people around us? We've got lots of people around us now. What are people sort of chatting about around the water cooler, for example?
I think especially for the purpose of this event itself, it's really revolving around decarbonization and green steel. I think I mentioned the Middle East and North Africa as a region, for an exciting region, and it just really goes without it's really hard to kind of move away from these topics because this area is really rich in renewable energy, and that is the main theme of it. When you are able to keep the cost of renewable energy at such a low level in itself, that really is a game changer when it comes to renewables and steelmaking in decarbonization as well. And I think a second advantage of the Middle East and North Africa, this region is really so close to major important markets, consumer markets such as Europe. Especially in Europe, there is a stronger compass when it comes to decarbonization, low carbon steel products, and conscious spending. So in this aspect, right? So when you are so close to such an important consumer market, it naturally gives you a comparative advantage over all the other steelmaking blocks, especially in China, where it may be further away and it's a whole different market sector altogether. So I think that's what most people are actually excited about in this region. Number one, renewable energy. Number two, its competitive advantages just due to its geographical location alone.
That's so interesting that geography is playing a part there. But you also referred to China quite a few times in your last couple of answers, and I think it's really important that we talk about the Chinese market, how it's looking this year, and how that slowdown is ultimately affecting the steel price.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's really hard not to speak about the steelmaking industry without mentioning the biggest elephant in the entire room, which is China itself. So I think in this sense, China has always it's basically risen in its status to become the largest steelmaking bloc in the entire world since the past decade, and it has capitalized its position over there, meaning it's the largest consumer of iron ore, it's the largest importer of iron ore, it's the largest producer of steel in the entire world. It's basically everything is in gargantuan proportion itself. So I think in this end, when we are talking about the steelmaking industry as a whole in general, it's very hard for you to kind of exclude China out of this narrative. Now, from the whole perspective of from the start of this year to right now, it is basically an extension of, I would say, a nightmare situation in China, whereby consumer markets are not performing very well. And also more importantly, it's the real estate industry that the Chinese government has not been able to kind of resuscitate. I think many news channels are saying, revive, resuscitate, it's ailing property estate sector itself. So I think it's really got to do with a lot of loss of consumer confidence in this entire sector, which has really weighed down on consumption of great steel products itself. So long steel, when it's in relation to construction and the construction industry, flat steel and hot rolled coil, they're really integral in manufacturing industry as well. So in this, from the start of this year, from 2024 till now, we have not seen a spark since the pandemic hit. So I think that has really kind of weighed things down. But I would put a kind of pin on that, because we did see some form of recovery in prices towards the end of third quarter and the start of fourth quarter. Surprising, right? I think it's really a testament as to some of the policies that Chinese government has actually set in place, which has really gone a long way in improving consumption in the Chinese market. I think October numbers were actually looking very good in the sense where we did see a boost in consumption. But how this extra oomph in consumption actually translates into extra steel demand and extra support for the prices in the longer run, I think is something that the entire industry is still fairly uncertain about. But I think exciting times that we are in, we could be at a point where we are seeing the lowest prices for steel and things could be going up. But then again, whenever we have this point of view, things might just go down again. So it's really just a gamble, which is why people actually say, it's always a gamble when you're playing with prices and you're playing with forward positions. But we leave it up to the brokers and traders for that, not for us.
Well, it's so interesting to hear that you're waiting on those figures. Ultimately, you're waiting for the Chinese economy to recover so that it starts more construction projects. In the meantime, have we seen changes to trade flows?
Trade flows into the Chinese market, I think beyond the volume itself, I think what people actually often do not see is the quality of the type of iron ore that's going into. So iron ore is basically, as for the uninitiated, right? Iron ore is basically it's a kind of product that exists as a compound product with iron oxide itself. So essentially, what I mean is that the higher degree of iron content, it means it's a higher grade of iron ore itself. So the most often shipped mid-grade iron ore would be 62% iron ore originating from Australia itself. So major companies like Rio Tinto, BHP, they do ship iron ore at about an iron content about 60 to 62%. Lower grade would be about 57% iron ore itself. And when you're going into higher grades can even go up to 65%, 67.5%. But as you might know, higher grade iron ore, it's a lot more scarce, and of course with that it comes with a stronger premium itself. So in this sense, when I was saying that prices in China have not been performing that well, I think steel makers have had to struggle with thinning profit margins, because when your prices of steel are going down, that's where it really comes on the pressure when you're on the profit margins itself. So how they kind of ameliorate these problems is that they try to keep their cost of productions lower, and by keeping cost of productions lower, it means to kind of squeeze the price that iron ore that they're importing, and to kind of lower this cost of production. It's really to, number one, buy lesser iron ore, or number two, buy cheaper iron ore. And buying cheaper iron ore, it just means buying lower grade iron ore, such as 58%, 57%, or even lower grade iron ore from India as well, which is higher in impurities. And so these can be up to be as low as 53 to 54%, to just kind of keep their cost of production low, to kind of tide through things until a certain boost in the Chinese economy comes, and that's where prices come up again. Then things will be a lot rosier.
Okay, so could that boost be, well, it's very unlikely to be, isn't it? But could that boost be the new Trump presidency? I think it's more likely to be the opposite, isn't it?
Well, I think the Trump presidency has been the talk of the town since the start of the entire conference. In literally every single panel we've been hearing is that what is going to be a likely impact of Trump presidency. I mean, if everyone could flip the tarot card, they'll be asking that question anyway as well. So I think one of the main trends coming out from the Trump presidency would really just be, on the cards, we are looking at higher protectionist measures on Chinese exports, which number one could be Chinese steel itself. China is the largest producer of steel, right? And a lot of this production cannot be met up with the domestic demand. So a lot of this product is being pushed out into external sources. So our main few buyers would be Vietnam, Southeast Asia in particular, India, Middle East as well, and also another market would be the US as well. So with a Trump presidency on the lines, what one can expect, I think one of the panelists was just mentioning that about a possible 60% tariff on Chinese exports.
I mean, that would be disastrous, wouldn't it, for the Chinese economy, potentially?
Yeah, so I think this is what we see on the surface level. So we are actually more interested in the other blowbacks of this phenomenon, let me say. So 60% tax on Chinese exports. It means that it's a rise in costs of importing Chinese steel. So in this sense, it makes sense for Chinese steel to flow elsewhere into other regions. So I think what I've not been mentioning is that the special thing about Chinese steel is that, number one, low cost. China has been able to kind of expand their capacity of production to a point where they're able to keep the cost of production really, really low per ton of steel. So that's their advantage of kind of mass production to kind of keep the cost of steel low. And so these low cost steel, they are actually flowing into other parts of the world. And when you have countries like the US implementing protectionist measures, that's where you're seeing a high influx of steel entering other markets in Southeast Asia, Middle East, North Africa, and also Europe as well. So in the likelihood that a Trump presidency is going to be in power, so I think that is going to be a likely impact where you're going to see a large influx of steel entering these different markets, and I do suspect that other markets would have their own respective way to kind of counter this influx of Chinese steel from coming into their countries, because the impacts of these products entering your country would be you're kind of pricing out your own domestic industries. So can you imagine your own domestic industries producing steel at about, let's say, $450 per ton, US dollars per ton, and you have steel coming in at $400, and you're basically just pricing out your domestic industries itself. What a disaster for governments, for your local industries to be getting priced out by cheap Chinese steel. So it makes sense for governments to kind of erect different measures to kind of counter these influx, but I think I suspect that it won't be as outright as a 60% tax on Chinese steel, but I think other industries are actually kind of having creative ways to kind of slow down the influx of Chinese steel from entering the markets in a creative way, and I think it kind of makes sense, and these come in the form of carbon control, to kind of look at quality, because once you nitpick on the quality, that's where the price involved just kind of goes up, and you're really just slowly paring out the low-cost Chinese steel that's coming into your country itself. So in this way, different countries are kind of erecting their own unique ways. In Europe, you have the CBAM, which kind of tracks carbon content of the steel itself and kind of encourages carbon reporting, carbon tracing. And I think we do hear other countries like Thailand, Korea slowly coming up with their own draft legislations to kind of increase the quality of steel imports coming to their country. But it's very hard to ignore the fact that it's really just to kind of protect the domestic industries from the influx of Chinese steel.
It's interesting that other countries other than the United States aren't as willing to be as explicit as Donald Trump is, maybe, about wanting to erect trade barriers. They have to sort of work around the edges, so to speak. Now, you've mentioned the Middle East several times in our conversation already, and I read this fascinating statistic somewhere. I wrote it down here. Construction in NEOM is apparently using up a fifth of the world's steel at the moment. NEOM, of course, the brand new city that is being built in the desert in the Saudi kingdom. First of all, is that true? Is that and how big an impact is that having on the market?
Let's just start with this. I find that this 20% statistic has been the most oft quoted in every single industry panel and all that. Well, while I think we're not too sure on the granularity of on the specifics of how much steel is going to consume, but I do think that it is one of the largest scale kind of construction projects in that the world has actually ever seen in decades. So I think while it may or may not come up to a point where it's 20% of total world steel consumption, but it is a sizable kind of project itself. And if you count it alongside with the other mega projects that are being on the cards in the entire region itself, we are seeing a sizable force from a construction point of view from the Middle East, the Gulf countries. They are really kind of showing up in terms of demand for construction. And you look on the flip side, in China itself, there's the real estate companies, they are struggling in kind of boosting consumption. And really because China is facing a cyclical, China is basically facing a structural problem whereby it's an aging population. We're not seeing as a lot of replacement in terms of its population. So the amount of houses that they actually do need is actually a lot lesser in this sense.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, and you contrast it with booming regions such as the Middle East and North Africa. That's where construction is actually leading the growth in terms of steel demand.
That is fascinating, that basically construction comes down to populations. And then you can see the correlation, of course. Once you get causal about it, you can see why the two would entirely correlate. Okay, so if you were going to look into a crystal ball, we've already talked about tarot cards, but I'm going to properly ask you to look into 5 years into the distance. Of course, that's after a Trump presidency, which is interesting. You had 4 years of Trump and then an extra year. What changes would you expect to see in the sector?
Yeah, I think 5 years' time we will definitely have to place stronger emphasis on green steel premiums and higher grade steel. I think the world is I feel that the world is currently still contending with the effect of whether low cost steel versus low carbon steel itself. So I think it shouldn't be in this dichotomy where the two of them are just trying to coexist with each other. I think ultimately in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, it's really important that the whole steelmaking industry kind of pivots towards low carbon steel, and that's where you really feel that government policies, industry collaborations, and everything, they're really just channeled towards this aspect where, even down to the consumers, there is an understanding among the consumers that, low carbon steel is the way to go instead of just looking at whichever is the cheapest product in the entire market itself. So I think education across the entire consumer market, government-led efforts and collaboration across industries, that is something that we are actually seeing right now, and it is something that we will be seeing on the longer run, more beyond 5 to 10 years as well in the steelmaking industry.
What I love is that you just used the word collaboration several times, and my next question sort of focuses around that, not least because this year's conference theme is Transform Tomorrow Together. Now, we've been asking all of our guests this question. What does that mean to you, and how important is collaboration for the future of the industry?
Yeah, I think it has been mentioned in a lot of panels since it was even if it's just one morning, right? A very overarching theme is that it's really just not the effort of one industry player, but really it's a accumulation of efforts from all the way from the government to businesses and even consumers and even to the regular average Joe like you and me. And when we're making our conscious consumer decisions as to whether or not to make a particular purchase on this product over another product based on certain ideals. So I think you have to kind of make it a way of life where, decarbonization and lowering our carbon footprint is normalized, and this is not something that's easily done through just a personal conviction that, hey, I need to do something, make conscious effort in making different life decisions. It's really a accumulation of an entire industry, entire sectors involved where, because you need to kind of look at where resources are being divvied up to, resource allocation, and kind of supporting your industries. I think this is really important, and we actually are seeing this being we are seeing semblance of this being laid out throughout this conferences where, your steelmakers are actually benefiting from government funding and government collaboration between businesses and even universities where they're doing research. So I think this really a microcosm of your entire an entire movement where we're going towards lowering our carbon footprint and helping and stopping global warming. I think it can start with the steelmaking industry. The steelmaking industry, it's big itself, but ultimately it's still a microcosm of how the entire world is just trying to slow down the impacts and mitigate the impacts of climate change and to kind of protect the future of our younger ones.
Really exciting to hear that idea of green steel and working together to move towards a more sort of carbon-friendly industry. And I'm thrilled that it's making the top of many, many agendas and many panels. So that's really interesting. Norman, thank you so much for sharing your valuable insights. It's great to hear about what's going on around us at this conference. And it's also to get a great insight on the steel and iron sector right now. Thank you very much indeed. And whether you're here in person and listening around us now, or if you're tuning in later, be sure to subscribe to this series so you don't miss a single episode. And you can also catch up on previous episodes, of course, wherever you get your podcasts. We're everywhere. Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, and of course, you may have your own way of getting your podcasts as well. But to learn more also about our upcoming events in the steel and commodities industries, please visit the metals section on our website, fastmarkets.com.